The quarterly reports were due by 5, and our department was in chaos. "Where are the Nielsen projections?" Marcus barked across the open plan office. "Andrea, did you finish those slides for tomorrow's presentation?" "Almost done," Andrea called back, not looking up from her screen. I kept my head down at my desk, triple-checking my own reports before sending them up to management. After 7 years at Westfield Financial, I knew that accuracy was everything, especially when Marcus was in one of his moods. "Ellie," Marcus suddenly appeared at my cubicle. "Did you finalize the merger analysis yet? Davis is asking for it." "Sent it an hour ago," I replied, pulling out the email confirmation. And I added the supplementary data he requested about quarterly performance comparisons. Marcus frowned, obviously annoyed that he couldn't find fault. "Fine. When you're done with whatever you're doing, Andrea could use some help. She's struggling with the presentation." I nodded, though I knew what would happen. I'd help Andrea. She'd present the work as her own tomorrow, and I'd be invisible again. It was a pattern I knew all too well. "My name is Eleanor Chen, and I was the most qualified person in our department who couldn't seem to get promoted. I joined Westfield straight out of my MBA program, where I graduated top of my class. I was passionate, dedicated, and, according to my performance reviews, exceptionally talented with outstanding analytical skills. Yet somehow, after 7 years of consistent excellence, I remained in the same mid-level position while watching colleagues with less experience and fewer qualifications move up the ladder. Marcus had been hired 4 years after me but was promoted to team lead within 18 months. Andrea joined just 2 years ago with only a bachelor's degree but was already being groomed for senior management. The pattern was clear, though no one would ever say it aloud. At Westfield Financial, your advancement depended more on who you knew and how well you played office politics than on your actual contributions. That evening, as the office emptied, I found myself alone with Davis Reynolds, our division director. He rarely interacted with anyone below management level, so I was surprised when he stopped by my desk. "Eleanor, right?" he said, though we'd been introduced countless times over the years. "Yes, sir. Eleanor Chen." He nodded, glancing at the reports on my screen. "Marcus tells me you've been instrumental in preparing the merger analysis." I completed the analysis, yes. I corrected gently. It was a complex project that required integrating data from multiple departments. Davis raised an eyebrow, seemingly taken aback by my direct response. Well, the executive team was impressed. "Good work." "Thank you. I actually have some additional insights about potential efficiencies that weren't included in the report. If you're interested, I'd be happy to discuss them." He checked his watch. "Perhaps another time. There's a management meeting starting in 5 minutes. After he left, I sat back in my chair, a familiar heaviness settling in my chest. Another opportunity slipped away, another chance to demonstrate my capabilities dismissed. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Zoe. "Still at work? Don't forget dinner tonight." I'd completely forgotten our plans. Quickly packing up my things, I headed out, grateful for the reminder. Zoe had been my roommate in business school and now worked at Summit Partners, one of our competitors. Our monthly dinners were a sacred tradition, a chance to vent, laugh, and remind ourselves that work wasn't everything. "You look exhausted," Zoe observed as I slid into the booth at our favorite restaurant. "End of quarter madness," I explained, gratefully accepting the glass of wine she pushed toward me, plus the usual Westfield drama. "Let me guess, someone else is taking credit for your work?" "I filled her in on Thomas Reed is leaving Summit," she said, referring to their chief strategy officer. "It's not public yet, but they're starting to look at candidates. Your name came up. The day's events, including my brief interaction with Davis." "When are you going to stop letting them use you like this?" Zoe demanded, her frustration evident. "You're brilliant, Ellie. You should be running that department by now." "I've tried," I sighed. "I've applied for every promotion, created detailed presentations about my contributions, even asked for additional responsibilities to prove myself. Nothing changes." "Maybe it's time for a change then," Zoe said carefully. "A change of scenery." Something in her tone made me look up sharply. "What are you saying?" I nearly choked on my wine. "Me, for a C-suite position. That's a massive jump from where I am now." "Is it the Zoe challenge? Or is it where you should have been already if Westfield hadn't been holding you back? Our CEO has seen your work through the proposals you've helped develop for Westfield. He's impressed, and he's interested in talking to you. Westfield would see it as a betrayal if I went to a competitor, I pointed out. And how loyal have they been to you? Zoe countered. She had a point. 7 years of dedication had earned me nothing but more work and fewer acknowledgments. I'd stayed out of a misguided sense of loyalty and the hope that eventually my contributions would be recognized. Just think about it, Zoe urged. I can set up a confidential meeting. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a discreet meeting with Summit's CEO, James Harrison. What I'd expected to be a casual conversation turned into a 3-hour deep dive into my vision for the company's future, my analysis of the market, and my ideas for strategic growth. I'm impressed, Eleanor, James said as our meeting concluded. Your reputation doesn't do you justice. My reputation. He smiled. In this industry, exceptional talent rarely goes unnoticed, even when it's underutilized. We've had our eye on you for some time. A week after that, I received a formal offer, Chief Strategy Officer at Summit Partners, with a compensation package that nearly made me drop the phone when I heard the figure. I gave Westfield my 2 weeks' notice the next day. Davis seemed shocked, Marcus was visibly upset, and the rest of the team looked at me like I'd grown a second head. No one had expected quiet, reliable Ellie to make such a bold move. Summit Partners, Marcus repeated when I told him. But they're our competition. This feels like a betrayal, Ellie. I maintain my professional composure. It's a career opportunity I couldn't pass up. I valued my time at Westfield, but I'm ready for new challenges. News of my departure and my destination spread quickly through the company. Suddenly, people who had barely acknowledged me for years were stopping by my desk to chat. Some offered genuine congratulations. Others, I suspected, were fishing for information about Summit. 3 days before my last day, Andrea approached me at the coffee machine. So, CSO at Summit, she said with a forced smile. That's quite a leap. It is, I agreed. I've actually been thinking of exploring new opportunities myself. She continued casually. Westfield can be so limiting, you know? I nodded noncommittally. I was wondering if maybe you could put in a good word for me at Summit. Once you're settled in, of course. My expertise in client relations would be valuable to any firm. I nearly laughed at her audacity. The same Andrea who had consistently taken credit for my work, who had excluded me from important meetings, who had once told Davis that my analysis was too complicated to be useful, now wanted my help. I'll keep that in mind, I said neutrally. By the end of the week, both Marcus and 3 other team members had made similar requests. It seemed my former colleagues had suddenly recognized my value, or at least, the value of my new connections. My last day at Westfield was anticlimactic. There was a hastily arranged goodbye lunch where Davis gave a generic speech about team members moving on to new opportunities. I cleared out my desk, said my goodbyes, and walked out of the building feeling oddly light, as if shedding a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying. My first month at Summit was exhilarating and challenging in equal measure. As CSO, I had real authority, a talented team that respected my input, and the freedom to implement strategies I'd envisioned for years. James Harrison proved to be a supportive CEO who valued transparency and innovation, qualities that had been sorely lacking at Westfield. I was reviewing quarterly projections one afternoon when my assistant Ray interrupted with a message. You've received emails from several people at Westfield Financial, he informed me. They're asking about potential positions here at Summit. They've all mentioned knowing you personally. I asked him to forward the emails to me. There they were, messages from Marcus, Andrea, and 2 other former colleagues, all expressing their excitement about potential opportunities at Summit and mentioning their strong professional relationship with me. I shook my head at their presumption but set the emails aside. I had more important matters to focus on. A week later, as I was preparing for my first board presentation, Ray appeared at my door again. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should see. He handed me a tablet displaying an email thread. Our security flagged this as potentially concerning. It appears someone is trying to access internal documents using your old Westfield credentials. I scanned the security report with growing alarm. Someone had attempted to log into Summit systems using an email address deceptively similar to mine, with just one character different, a classic phishing technique. The attempt had been blocked, but it raised serious concerns. Do we know where this originated? I asked. Ray nodded grimly. The IP address traces back to Westfield Financial's corporate network. I sat back stunned. This wasn't just unethical. It was potentially illegal corporate espionage. And given the timing and the targeted nature of the attempt, I had a strong suspicion who might be behind it. There's more, Ray added. Since this raised red flags, security did a deeper dive into attempted communications with our networks. They found several emails from Westfield to various Summit employees containing attachments with embedded tracking software designed to monitor when and where the documents are opened. Let me guess, the emails came from Marcus or Andrea. Both, actually, and they specifically targeted team members on your staff. A cold anger settled in my chest. Not content with taking credit for my work for years, they were now actively trying to undermine me in my new position, possibly hoping I would fail so spectacularly that Summit would be eager to hire them as replacements. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Ray. Please ask its security to compile a comprehensive report of all these incidents and schedule a meeting with legal for tomorrow morning. After Ray left, I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder containing the emails from my former colleagues requesting job referrals. As I reread them, something nagged at me, a memory I couldn't quite place. On a hunch, I logged into my personal email account and searched through archived messages from my time at Westfield. There they were, a series of emails I'd saved years ago, when I first begun to suspect that my contributions were being deliberately minimized. Marcus to Davis. Re. Chen proposal. I've reviewed Ellie's work, and while the analysis is thorough, I believe her conclusions are misguided. I've attached my own recommendation, which offers a more practical approach. The attached, more practical approach had been a watered-down version of my original strategy, with my name nowhere to be found. Andrea to the executive team. For tomorrow's client presentation, I've prepared the attached materials, while Ellie assisted with some basic data collection. All strategic insights and recommendations are my own. This for a presentation I had created entirely from scratch, with Andrea contributing nothing but her name on the cover page. Most damning of all was an email thread where Marcus, Andrea, and 2 other team members discussed my application for a management position. We need to make sure Davis understands she's not management material, Marcus had written. She's useful as an analyst, but can you imagine her trying to lead client meetings? She bore everyone to tears with her technical details. I'll mention my concerns about her communication skills, Andrea had replied, and how the Jensen account specifically requested to work with me instead of her. A complete fabrication. The Jensen account had been one of my biggest successes. If all else fails, another colleague added, we can bring up that mistake in the Morrison report. She corrected it immediately, but Davis doesn't need to know that part. As I read through these exchanges, evidence of a years-long campaign to undermine my career advancement, the lingering self-doubt that had plagued me at Westfield finally evaporated. I hadn't been paranoid. I hadn't been imagining the obstacles. My colleagues had actively worked against me, all while benefiting from my labor and expertise. And now they wanted me to help them advance their careers. The irony was almost laughable. The next morning, after meeting with Summit's legal team about the security breaches, I made a decision. I forwarded all the evidence to our CEO, James Harrison, along with a proposal. This is disturbing, James said after reviewing the materials, both the historical pattern and these recent attempts to compromise our systems. What do you suggest we do? I have an idea, I replied, one that addresses the security concern while also sending a clear message about corporate ethics. 2 weeks later, Ray informed me that several former Westfield colleagues had arrived for their interviews. Interviews? I asked, momentarily confused. Yes, with HR. Marcus Williams, Andrea Torres, and 2 others. They said you had arranged for them to discuss opportunities at Summit. I checked my watch and smiled. Ah, yes. Please tell HR to keep them waiting. I'll be down in 3 hours. 3 hours? Ray looked puzzled. Yes, exactly 3 hours. Not a minute less. And please make sure the conference room has a projector set up. For the next 3 hours, I focused on actual Summit business while my former colleagues sat in the reception area, periodically being told that things were running a bit behind schedule. It was a small thing, making them wait, but after years of having my time and contributions devalued, it felt appropriate. At precisely the 3-hour mark, I made my way to the conference room where they had finally been escorted. Their expressions as I walked in, CSO nameplate on my door, executive suite on the top floor, were a mixture of surprise, envy, and calculated friendliness. Ellie, Marcus stood, extending his hand. It's great to see you. We've been looking forward to discussing how we might contribute to Summit's success. Eleanor, I corrected him calmly, and thank you all for coming. I took my seat at the head of the table and opened my laptop, connecting it to the projector. Before we begin, I'd like to discuss the purpose of this meeting. We're very excited about the potential opportunities here. Andrea jumped in eagerly. After working with you for so long at Westfield, we know we'd be valuable additions to your team. Yes, about that, I said, clicking to my first slide. Let's talk about our history of working together. On a screen appeared the email from Andrea to the executive team claiming my work as her own. The blood drained from her face as she recognized her own words. This is just one example of a pattern I've documented over several years. I continued, clicking through to display Marcus's email undermining my proposal, and then the thread discussing how to sabotage my promotion. The room had gone deathly quiet. What is this? Marcus finally asked, his voice strained. Why are you showing us old emails? Context, I replied simply. I believed in making hiring decisions based on complete information. And speaking of information, I clicked to the next slide, which detailed the recent attempts to access Summit systems using a spoofed version of my email address, along with the tracking software embedded in documents they had sent to my team members. Our cybersecurity team was quite interested in these activities, I noted, as was our legal department. Their expressions shifted from embarrassment to alarm. This is a misunderstanding, Marcus began, but I held up my hand. I invited you here today to deliver 3 messages, I said calmly. First, your applications for employment at Summit Partners have been declined. Second, Summit will be filing a formal complaint with regulatory authorities regarding the attempted unauthorized access of our systems. And third, I placed 4 folders on the table, one in front of each of them. These contain copies of all the evidence we've gathered, which we'll also be sharing with Westfield's board of directors. They might be interested to learn how some of their employees have been behaving. You can't do this, Andrea protested, her voice rising. This is vindictive. No, Andrea. This is consequences. For years, you all built your careers by undermining mine. You took credit for my work, sabotaged my advancement, and created a hostile work environment. And when that wasn't enough, you attempted to compromise my new position through unethical and potentially illegal means. I stood straightening my jacket. Security will escort you out of the building. Your visitor badges will be collected at the exit. As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared at the door. Ellie, please, Marcus began, a note of desperation in his voice. We can explain. It's Eleanor, I corrected him again. Chief Strategy Officer Eleanor Chen. And no explanation is necessary. Your actions have spoken volumes. I watched as they were escorted out, folders clutched in their hands, faces ashen. There was no satisfaction in their humiliation, only a quiet sense of justice finally served. Back in my office, I found James Harrison waiting for me. How did it go? He asked. As expected, I replied. They were surprised. He nodded thoughtfully. You handled it well. Many people in your position might have been tempted to simply reject their applications and move on. Or worse, to retaliate in kind by spreading rumors or undermining them at Westfield. That would make me no better than them, I pointed out. All I did was present facts, their own words and actions. What happens next is up to Westfield's leadership. James smiled. And that's exactly why you're sitting in the CSO's office. Integrity matters here at Summit. The fallout came swiftly. By the end of the week, Westfield had launched an internal investigation into the security breach attempts and the pattern of workplace misconduct. Marcus and Andrea were placed on administrative leave pending the results. Davis Reynolds called me personally, his tone a mixture of apology and damage control. Eleanor, I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously. Had I been aware of this behavior? But you were aware, Davis, I interrupted gently. Maybe not of the specific emails, but the pattern was clear. I raised concerns about credit for my work multiple times over the years. I applied for promotions with stellar performance reviews and was repeatedly passed over. You chose not to see it. There was a long pause before he responded. You're right, and I owe you an apology for that. We're implementing changes to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I'm glad to hear it, I said sincerely. Despite everything, I had colleagues at Westfield I cared about, people who deserved better than the culture that had held me back. 6 months later, Summit Partners announced record growth under our new strategic direction. My team had developed innovative approaches that were transforming how we serve our clients, and the board had approved an aggressive expansion plan I championed. On the anniversary of my first day as CSO, Zoe and I met for dinner at the same restaurant where she'd first suggested I consider leaving Westfield. To new beginnings, she toasted, raising her glass. And to finally being recognized for the badass you've always been. I laughed and clinked my glass against hers. To recognizing our own worth, even when others don't. Have you heard the latest about Westfield? She asked. I had, of course. Marcus and Andrea had both been let go following the investigation. Westfield had implemented new anti-discrimination policies and overhauled their promotion practices. Davis Reynolds had taken early retirement, replaced by a new division director known for her emphasis on merit-based advancement. They're trying to recruit me again, I admitted. The new leadership reached out last week, offered me a position as executive vice president. Zoe's eyes widened. Are you considering it? I shook my head. I'm exactly where I need to be. For the first time in my career, I'm valued not just for what I produce, but for who I am and how I lead. That's worth more than any title or corner office. Even a really nice corner office. Zoe teased, knowing how much I loved my new workspace with its floor-to-ceiling windows. Even that, I confirmed with a smile, though the view doesn't hurt. Later that evening, as I walked home through the city streets, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The years of frustration at Westfield had been painful, but they had also forged something essential in me, a certainty about my own worth that no one could ever take away. I had faced betrayal and emerged stronger for it. Not by becoming like those who had wronged me, but by refusing to let their actions define me or limit what I could achieve. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't the moment my former colleagues faced consequences for their actions. It was this, walking confidently toward a future I had shaped on my own terms, finally free of the doubts they had tried so hard to instill. That was a victory no one could ever take credit for but me.